Welcome to the Future of Less Work, where we explore how work is transforming one conversation at a time. I'm Nirit Cohen, and today's conversation began as many connections do these days, online. Barbara Wittmann and I met through mutual curiosity about what's actually changing beneath the surface of AI transformation with people and work. We found ourselves circling the same tension. Organizations are investing billions in technology, but the real constraint seems to be human. How leaders align people with work, how middle layers translate strategy into reality, how humans sense what data cannot. Barbara Wittmann is the founder of the Digital Wisdom Collective, a former interim CIO who has spent decades at the intersection of business, IT, and organizational change. And it quickly became apparent, at least to me, that we should take our conversation on mic. Barbara, welcome to Future of Less Work.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited for this conversation. And yes, it was very apparent that we have a lot to talk about.
Yeah, and we started, and I actually want to start with the Digital Wisdom Collective. I have to say that caught my attention because the name really resonated with me. I strongly believe we need to co-create this area. So what do you mean by digital wisdom and why collective?
Yeah. So I think we have one very big thing missing right now in organizations and in people, and that is the piece of wisdom. And I know it's a little bit of a clunky term and it's not really mainstream for business, but we cannot create a digital world without wisdom in the game. Because we need to look at a bigger picture, because we have unintended consequences. If we are doing things here, it's going to have ripples there. So we need to upskill the people and the organizations to be wise. And digital wisdom essentially is a new business sense that is a combination of many things that we now place individually in our charts that we need to train people for, like systemic thinking or other skills. So the question...
So let me just make sure I understand. Is that your way of separating between the thinking that machines can do and the nuanced thinking that humans do?
Exactly. It is, how do we bring in our uniqueness, and also how do we string it together with others? And that is the piece of the collective that is super important, because what's keeping me up at night is how do we upgrade our collective intelligence in a time where AI models change on a daily basis?
So, okay, so that's really big question. And I think before we go there, I'm curious whether you think the wisdom that we have to identify, as in the nuanced human contribution, is that something that exists as we separate the work between what AI can do and what people do? Or do we have to build it? Do we have to reskill? Is there something there we need to create?
We have to reskill in a sense, but it's nothing that is new to us as humans, because it is deeply ingrained in our DNA. And that is, such things as how do we ask good questions? How do we listen? How do we string stories together? How do we make the wisdom of many actually count? So in a sense, it is training what I would call the spidey senses. It's not just looking in our box that we work in, but it's like, how do we sense the system in a way?
I think it's really interesting. Yeah. I mean, I just got off a keynote with a group of managers, and we talked about how management needs to evolve so that we, even in the transition, right? And you talk about the questions, and we managed for years in attempting to get answers, right? I mean, there was a task and you solved it. And I actually think that these days answers are cheap. It's the questions that are tricky.
Yeah, absolutely. And we need to look at the system as a whole. So we need to think more in the direction of an ecosystem. And how the human is actually part of an ecosystem, and what are the things that need to be directed towards a human and what is more machine oriented. But that is entirely different or contrary to how we think of organizations today, because we still think in hierarchies and the pyramid. So how do we work together more in a networked way. Yeah.
So okay, so let's try to think through this. So if I'm a leader and I'm listening to you, right, and I already know that AI is coming in, and I have to unbundle work from jobs and make sure my people hand over the stuff to AI. And now I have a bunch of people and a bunch of tools, and I need to restitch that back together again in a different way. So when you're thinking collective, right, what would you have them do?
So to me, the magic happens in the middle of the organization, because that is where strategy really hits execution. So
you're talking about middle management, right?
Middle management, yes.
Yeah, and which is really interesting, because a lot of data shows that that's where leaders consider bureaucracy and overhead, and they're cutting that layer.
Yes.
So why is that wrong?
That is wrong because that is the layer where you cannot delegate complexity anymore. Up top, you have a grand idea, you can kick it down the ladder, but then eventually the people in the middle will have to move on it, and they will have to do it. So the worst thing we can do is that we teach middle management to delegate complexity to AI, because that is just another way of, kicking the can down the road in a way. So we need to teach middle management to actually get together and see how does that make sense in the entirety of a system. And that means that we look at several angles at the same time. We need to look at what kind of systems do we have in place? What kind of tools do we have in place that help us to orient in these systems? And then, what are the use cases that actually make sense for it? And that's when you actually get traction for technology. Because if you don't do that, if you don't leverage that middle layer, what happens is your tool box in the company is going to look like a cluttered garage. No one is going to remember anymore what is in the very back corner, and your cost is skyrocketing and is totally going, haywire. So
so it's interesting, because you actually are coming at this conversation from a CIO perspective, right? From a person who looks at the tools and the toolbox of the organization. You're basically saying, and I have to tell you, this resonates with a lot of conversations I've had with people who actually could kind of point to the difference between the pilots that work and the ones that don't, right? They ultimately talk about redesigning the process at that middle layer that can look at the process from a big enough perspective that they see a kind of broader ecosystem, but from a small enough perspective that they're actually close to the details. And you're saying, okay, that's a human thing. It's also a tool thing, because otherwise, how do we stitch everything together?
Yes, exactly. And I can tell you that standard in organizations, when I look in and I do an inventory of what is in that cluttered garage, most times I can find 20% of what they are not using or what they can actually save. So what's happening now is AI pilots, they are just piling on top of that. They are not really looking at how does that fit in, or what are we really trying to do. So the real gap that AI shows us right now is that we really need to work closer together from a technology angle and a human development angle, because what companies need essentially in that middle layer is what I call a human infrastructure. You need to meet what you have in a technology infrastructure with the same infrastructure thought on the human scale.
So you're saying, okay, the organization already has a lot of tools. And when AI comes in, we have to look at the processes, but we also have to go back and look at the tools that are being used and kind of redesign the whole thing together, people and tools.
Yes. Yeah.
I think it's actually been interesting to watch, because once we shift from human resources to intelligence resources, you actually you are, for all intents and purposes, combining what used to be HR and what used to be IT.
Exactly, and that's what I see in many places, especially with mid-sized companies, but also in some larger companies, that the functions are merging, or just the collaboration is much closer, and that's exactly what is needed. Because right now, the human development aspect is very detached from what happens in the technology angle, and that's where the mismatch is happening. So if we look at this jointly and we make the human upgrading something that is a budget line constantly, just like you would upgrade servers on an annual basis.
But
It's
Barbara,
exactly
how's
the
this
same thing.
different if we go back through history and we've done technology transformations for a long time, right?
Yeah.
And I kind of know parts of the answer to that, but from your perspective, I'm really curious. It's always been that way, that you bring in automation, new tools, new processes, new systems, and they disrupt the work of the people that used to do the manual work that you're now automating, and they change the workflow and they require training. How is this different?
This is different because it shows us the ugly underbelly of where things are not aligned, and that is the beauty, I think, that AI brings to us, because it is so fast, and it's much faster than any other technology that has hit us. That it really shows the cracks of, where is culture mismatched, where we still have silos. Where is a misalignment of business and IT? So everything that we thought we had patched up in organizations is now bubbling up in a very different way.
Show
Because
me an example. Do you have an example?
Sure. So, boards are right now approving a ton of pilots. Sorry. And now my voice goes. So it's super easy to shell out 200,000 and, hey, let's do a pilot. And the pilot is based on a ton of assumptions, and also a lot of pressure, fear of missing out. Right? The board is saying, "Well, we got to jump on that train, but now." So assumptions are being basically handed down. It's the kicking down the road, and it's handed down in the organization. So the assumption from the board goes to the CEO. The CEO hands over the assumption to the CIO, and he hands it over to the team. So by that time, we have a whole cluster of things that we are assuming about how this is going to work and how it's going to make a difference. That's what I'm saying about, that's where the cultural gap shows. That's where the gaps in governance or just general ethics in a company show. Because if no one is empowered to speak up and say, "Hey, I have a question here," it is just dragging along.
Yeah, I wonder though. So the process you described, when this was big systems, big budgets, right? Doesn't a lot of AI transformation bubble up from the bottom? Isn't it about the finance team figuring out that potentially they need to fix their data so that they could bring in tools, or bring in analysis tools so that they do the analysis faster than they used to, or things like that?
Exactly. But it shows the cracks, because most companies have never done a cleanup in their data. So if you don't have the best data, you cannot put any tools on top. If practical examples are coming from where the work happens, that's great. But most of these practical examples are not AI. They are just very simple automation that can already be done with the tools at hand. So real AI innovation.
Whose responsibility is it to say, wait a minute, I get that you're trying to do this. It's actually a good idea. One, we need to fix the data. Two is there's a better way to do it. This is not AI. Frankly, who cares? I mean, this is another one that keeps bubbling up. A lot of people are saying a lot of the first cycle of what we call AI is actually automation.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. So we just put a different label on it. And that's frankly, what you described, and we've always done transformation. That's great. Yeah. I just, last Friday, I was at a meeting for the American SAP user group here in Colorado, and honestly, I've been in this industry for 25 years, and there's not. I mean, we just put different labels on things, but we don't fix the underlying issue. We've always had issues with data. We always had issue with bringing people along. So now we don't call it digital transformation anymore. Now we call it AI transformation. Well, that's great. So when are we actually looking under the hood? So,
and so what you're saying though is, if you don't fix the issues now, you won't be able to implement the system. It's almost like when it was
exactly.
It was a system, we could implement it, and people still filled the cracks. But with the way things are, if the data isn't properly addressed, the system, you won't get what you need to get, right?
Exactly. And, if you don't have like a data governance or responsibilities cleanly in place, that also hits you. So with the quicker cycles of AI, all these cracks are showing much faster. And then it's exactly the question. So whose responsibility is it to patch up? And who is holding everything together?
And who should it be? What's your answer?
So I think the IT person needs to step up and really hold the strings together, and really also go more in a creation and innovation mode together with other leaders in the organization. So it calls for a very different angle of collaboration between the person that's heading strategy, between the person that's heading HR and people development, because that all needs to be synced up. So there is, and the natural thing in organization is still, well, but I want to point at someone if things don't go so hot. And that is something we just need to get over in order to evolve.
So if you had it your way, would you actually combine the HR and IT function under one overarching intelligence function? Or
that depends
resources?
that depends on the size of the organization. In my world, what would be an immense advancement is that you have a CEO sidekick that is actually looking at somewhat of an ecosystem architecture. And that, in my mind, is missing right now. So if you're combining functions one level under the CEO, that's one thing. But who is actually, who is keeping the bigger picture in mind? That's going to be the bigger thing that needs to be figured out. And that can be a CEO that is just taking on a little more of that function, or it's somebody that is added in the strategy department. But also what we have as, an enterprise architect is not cutting it quite anymore, because you don't just look at a technology layer. You need to look at several layers and how they are interacting.
Yeah. And maybe I was going to ask you, so if I'm a manager in the middle, right? And you're giving me advice for Monday morning, what should I start doing differently tomorrow? What would that be?
That would be, who are your allies in the company? And what I see a lot in middle management is that the easiest is to go into a victim function and say, well, we can't change much because it's directed from up top and it's the strategy and everything. So I would tell you, go with the coalition of the willing. And there are several in the company that, maybe want to think in new ways just like you. So find your allies and make little steps. I think the other thing that we have done fundamentally wrong, and we didn't know any better, is that we thought of transformation as always a big thing that comes in, and a big system that happens, or some major disruption, and it's the big shakeup, and then it's going to be a 2-year thing, and then we're done. And the thing is, we really need to move more into an evolutionary state. So how do we continuously improve and upgrade, and not go into these cycles of, and now we're shaking the box and then things are better.
Yeah, it's not move from to. I always, when people say, okay, like we move to a new world of work, I say, no, that sounds like we're moving into a new stability. It's just, ever changing and evolving. But I also hear you saying to this middle manager, if you're building your ecosystem, right, try to make sure you've got the expert at whatever processes you own, but also make sure you've got your coalition of the willing from the technology side who can ask you the questions you don't know how to ask about the data and about the systems, and maybe about things that you can really use that aren't even, sophisticated AI and are not necessarily new. But also make sure you have in your coalition of the willing, the people perspective of the people who can help you look at what it does to jobs, to roles, to change management, maybe even finding your own internal people who could drive this because that's what they do naturally.
Yes.
Perfect. Wonderful. So another question I would like to kind of ask you as we wrap this up, because you've looked at this for such a long time, if you take us a few years down the road and you think through what's the question we should all be asking ourselves these days about the future of work?
Oh, that's a big one. So what we need to ask ourselves of the future of work, or things we need to look at, is how do we co-create? And I think that's a relationship that we need to mend fundamentally, because AI will be part of a co-creation process going forward. So AI will be one of our coworkers who will innovate with us and, who will do things with us. So what is our relationship with that? That asks a fundamental question in, then what is your human superpower? What are you really good at? So instead of caving in and saying, oh, AI is going to take my job, it's more the question of, what am I really good at? And
how do I find out, Barbara? What do you think? Because most people have a hard time getting under or stepping away from what I call the work about work, which is all the activity that we're used to doing, to actually find that true, unique perspective. I was giving this example earlier today in a keynote where you can say, okay, I can do my analysis, but we all know if you've ever worked with numbers, you can get all sorts of results from numbers. It depends on, what you do with them. And I can say I would do my PowerPoint, but as I build my PowerPoint, I build my unique story, right? I choose what to put the forefront and what to keep in the back.
Yeah.
That's, how do you find out? How do you separate those?
Well, that's the question I've been dabbling with, because I think you can only do so much in your own echo chamber. And the echo chamber is within you and around you in your company, because you're always asking the same questions, you're always getting the same answers back. That's where what I have built as the collective comes in, because it is a safe space where people can come to and they can crunch on challenges they have, and they can learn about themselves in a space that is totally outside of their regular realm. And it is with cross-industry leaders, even different hierarchy leaders. So sometimes it is more about seeing and experiencing other things and really learning and experiencing how I am, good or talented in certain ways. So yes, you can do all sorts of assessments, but it's not exactly giving you the practical angle that you may need to actually understand and grasp it.
Yeah, so I think that's a very strong point. The need to shift outside of your normal circle of people, even your normal types of tasks and activities, helps you get a different perspective on what you do. I always ask people to think about when people come to talk to them and consult with them when it's not their job, and it could be family and friends, or it could be just coworkers, because people intuitively know what your unique perspective and value add is, and they come looking for it when they need it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
And one important piece that I can only tell people that's going to get super important is the more you know about yourself. And that is a lot of, how is your mindset going into things? What's your attitude going into things? What's blocking you? The better you can stand against technology, your AI buddy, the better you can position yourself.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really important advice. Wow. Thank you, Barbara, for joining me today. Do you want to learn more about Barbara Wittmann and the Digital Wisdom Collective? You'll find all the links in the episode description. And if this episode resonated with you, you're welcome to share it with anyone navigating AI transformation in their organization. And remember, your best people do not work because they have to. They don't work because you measure them on it. They don't work because you pay them. They work because they want to. Because by working for you, they're doing what's important for them in life. Till next time.